Imagine, for a moment, that you're standing at the edge of a dead city. The air is still, heavy with the silence of a place that has not heard a human voice for thousands on thousands of years. The wind moves through the broken stones and empty streets, whispering through shattered archways and across the remnants of walls that once stood proudly against the sky. Beneath your feet lies the fractured foundations of a civilization so ancient that no one remembers its name. Its towers have long since crumbled into dust. Its roads are buried beneath layers of earth, sand or ice. Its harbours lie drowned beneath dark waters. Its temples have been swallowed by jungle and desert. Whatever machines it once had built have rusted away to nothing. Its books have rotted. Its language has vanished. Its people are gone. There's no surviving kings carved into monuments. No inscriptions to tell us who they were. No chronicles describing how they lived, what they believed, or what terrible fate brought the world to an end. Time has erased almost everything. And yet, scattered across our own world, there are fragments that seem to suggest that something came before us. There are monuments of astonishing scale, built at a time where human beings were supposedly little more than nomadic hunter-gatherers. Great stone structures aligned with the stars. Mathematical knowledge that appears with startling sophistication. Stories of a great flood found in cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years. Ancient texts describe men who lived for centuries. Traditions of wise beings who taught humanity how to build, measure, write, farm, and understand the heavens. Taken individually, each of these things can be explained. Together, they form a pattern that is difficult to ignore. Most people dismiss them as myths, metaphors, or coincidences. Perhaps they are right. But what of the memories? What if they are surviving echoes of a world that was destroyed? A civilization that rose to extraordinary heights before being swept away by a catastrophe, leaving behind only fragments of knowledge and stories passed from generation to generation. Stories that became myths, memories that became religion, history that became legend. And what if we're not the first great civilization to walk this planet? What if we are merely the latest? What if humanity had risen before, reached heights we can scarcely imagine, and then brought to ruin by forces beyond its control? What if the tales of floods, gods, and impossibly long-living ancestors are not inventions at all, but distorted recollections of events so ancient that history itself can no longer clearly remember them? Tonight, we explore one of the most unsettling questions of all of human history. Did our ancestors build a world before history began? And if they did, what happened to it? Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Dark History Podcast, where we delve into the darkest parts of human history. Hope you're all well. I'm Rob, your host as always, and you're listening to Season 5, Episode 14. Before we begin, I need to make something absolutely clear. This episode explores a speculative idea, and more than that, it's intended as a thought experiment, which is something that I like to do now and again. What you're about to hear is not a claim that historians and archaeologists have overlooked the ruins of a forgotten global super-civilization, nor is it an attempt to rewrite the accepted timeline of human history. But if you're anything like me, you want to know for yourself. You want to live it, breathe it. You want to form your own opinion. You want to think critically and ask the obvious questions. How do we really know? Is this idea truly beyond the realm of possibility? Or is it simply a theory that challenges the accepted narrative? And when so much time, money, and reputation is invested into our current understanding of history, how easy would it be to change the status quo? According to mainstream archaeology and history, there is no accepted evidence that a technologically advanced civilization existed before the earliest known societies of Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and other ancient cultures. There are no proven remains of prehistoric skyscrapers, computers, aircrafts, or hidden machines buried beneath the sands of time. And yet, there are genuine mysteries that continue to provoke curiosity. There are ancient monuments that challenge long-held assumptions about what prehistoric people were capable of achieving. There are flood stories that appear in cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years. There are sacred texts that describe ancestors living for centuries. And there is a very real scientific understanding that our planet has experienced catastrophic events, capable of reshaping landscapes, altering climates, and wiping entire societies from existence. I strongly believe that history is only written by the winners. The losers are often dead or ridiculed into silence. So you've got to ask yourself, well, what if? Tonight, we're going to examine the evidence, the myths, and theories, not to declare that any of these ideas are true, but simply to ask a question. If an advanced civilization had existed before recorded history, what traces might it leave behind? Yes, I also know this is the work of Graham Hancock and other people of that ilk, but what if they're right? So, settle in. Turn down the lights, maybe grab yourself a drink, because tonight we're going beyond the veil for more dark history. Recorded history feels immense to us. It encompasses the rise and fall of kingdoms, the birth of religions, the construction of monuments, and the countless wars, discoveries, and ideas that have shaped the world we live in today. When we think about history, we picture the pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Sumer, the philosophers of ancient Greece, the legions of the Roman Empire, and all the empires and nations that followed. It feels vast, stretching backwards into a seemingly unimaginable past. And yet, in the grand scale of human existence, recorded history is astonishingly brief. Written records extend back only around 5,000 years. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have walked this earth for roughly 300,000 years. That means more than 98% of our story unfolded before anyone wrote a single word. For the overwhelming majority of human existence, there were no chronicles, no king's lists, no sacred texts, and no inscriptions carved into stone. There were only people living, surviving, and passing on their knowledge through speech and memory. The scale becomes even more striking when you view it against the age of the Earth itself. Our planet is approximately 4.5 billion years old. If that immense span of time was compressed into a single 24-hour day, all of recorded human history would amount to around 1/10 of a second. Everything we know about kings and emperors, wars and religion, pyramids and temples, inventions and revolutions, would exist only in the briefest of flicker before midnight. For most of our time on Earth, our ancestors hunted across vast plains, gathered food from forests and rivers, migrated between continents, endured ice ages, and adapted to dramatic changes in climate and landscape. Entire coastlines appeared and disappeared. Rivers shifted course. Deserts formed where grassland once stood. Sea levels rose and swallowed land that had been inhabited for generations. Within that immense and largely undocumented stretch of time lies a troubling possibility. What if whole cultures rose and disappeared without leaving an obvious trace? We know that civilizations are fragile. Even the greatest societies in recorded history proved to be temporary. The Western Roman Empire collapsed. The Mayans abandoned the magnificent cities of the jungle. The Bronze Age world, with its palaces, trade networks, and powerful kingdoms, suffered a widespread breakdown around 1200 BCE. In each case, knowledge was lost, populations scattered, and once great centres of civilization were reduced to ruin. If our own civilizations were to vanish tomorrow, how much would remain after 10,000 years? Steel would corrode, concrete would crack, glass would shatter, satellites would fall from the sky. Digital records, the very foundation of our modern memory, would disappear almost instantly. In a few millennia, our cities would be buried beneath sediment and vegetation. After enough time, future archaeologists might uncover only scattered foundations, unusual alloys, and fragments of stories about people who flew through the sky and spoke to one another across continents. To them, we might seem like legends. And if that is true for us, it raises a profound and unsettling question. How many legends are in fact the faded memory of a world that came before? In the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey, near the modern-day city of Sanliurfa, lies one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries ever made, Göbekli Tepe. For thousands of years, it appeared to be nothing more than an unremarkable mound of earth and stone. Its Turkish name means pot-belly hill, and there was little to suggest that beneath this quiet rise in the landscape lay a monument that would force historians and archaeologists to rethink some of their most basic assumptions about the origins of civilization. When excavation began in the 1990s, archaeologists uncovered a complex unlike anything they'd expected to find. Buried beneath the soil were massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some standing more than 5 meters tall and weighing as much as 20 tons. These stones have been carefully quarried, carved, transported and erected in a large circular enclosure. Many were decorated with intricate reliefs of foxes, snakes, vultures, boars, scorpions, gazelles, and abstract symbols whose meanings remain a mystery. Some pillars appeared almost human, with carved arms, hands and belts, as though they were stylized figures standing in silent ritual. What makes Göbekli Tepe truly astonishing is not only the scale of the construction, but its age. The site dates to around 9,600 BCE, making it more than 11,000 years old. To appreciate just how ancient that is, it helps to place it in context. Göbekli Tepe was already thousands of years old before the first pyramids rose in ancient Egypt. It predates Sumer by roughly 6 millennia. It was built before Stonehenge, before metalwork, before pottery, before the wheel, and before the earliest cities appeared in the archaeological record. At the time these structures were erected, human beings were traditionally thought to be living in small bands of hunter-gatherers. According to older models of prehistory, they moved seasonally across the landscape, following animals and gathering wild plants. They had no writing system, no formal state, and no permanent urban settlement. Yet the people who built Göbekli Tepe were capable of organising large numbers of workers, planning complex construction projects, and creating monumental architecture on a scale that scholars once believed impossible for societies of this kind. For decades, archaeologists assumed that agriculture came first, followed by settled communities, and only later by temples and organised religion. Göbekli Tepe challenged that sequence. Here was compelling evidence that larger ceremonial structures may have been built before farming became widespread. Rather than agriculture creating civilization, it is possible that shared belief and collective ritual helped bring people together, encouraging the cooperation that eventually led to settled life. That idea alone transformed the way scholars think about the earliest stages of human society. The significance of Göbekli Tepe becomes even more striking when it's viewed alongside civilizations that emerged thousands of years later. A few episodes ago, we travelled to the plains of Sumer, where writing, mathematics, astronomy, law, and monumental architecture seem to appear with remarkable sophistication. In ancient Egypt, pyramids and temples were aligned with celestial events and constructed with extraordinary precision. In the Indus Valley civilization, cities such as Mohenjo-daro were laid out on orderly grids, complete with drainage systems, standardized bricks, and carefully planned streets. Although separate by vast distances and different cultural traditions, these early civilizations shared striking similarities. They observed the heavens and tracked the movements of the stars. They measured time with increasing accuracy. They built monuments intended to outlast generations. They developed systems of mathematics and geometry. And many preserve stories of floods, divine teachers, and ancient ages that have been lost. Mainstream archaeology explains these achievements through human intelligence, experimentation, and independent cultural development over long periods of time. And that explanation is both robust and convincing. Human beings are capable of extraordinary ingenuity, and there is no need to invoke hidden technologies or supernatural inventions to account for these accomplishments. Within the framework of this thought experiment, sites like Göbekli Tepe raise an interesting possibility. We know that ancient civilizations often built upon works of those who came before them. New societies reused old foundations, restored ruined temples, and incorporated ancient monuments into their own cultures and belief systems. In many cases, structures that were already old became part of the new civilization's identity. So, it is worth asking whether some of the great civilizations of the ancient world may have encountered monuments that were already standing. Could the people of Sumer, ancient Egypt, or the Indus Valley civilization have discovered ancient sites such as Göbekli Tepe, or even monuments like the Great Sphinx of Giza, and adopted them as part of their own civilization? To be clear, there is no accepted evidence that this happened. Mainstream archaeology explains these monuments within the cultures traditionally associated with them. But as part of this thought experiment, it's an intriguing idea. Perhaps some civilizations were not starting out entirely from scratch. Perhaps they were inheriting ruins, symbols and fragments of knowledge from a world that was already ancient when they first encountered it. Around 11,700 years ago, the last ice age came to an end, bringing with it one of the most dramatic periods of environmental change in human history. Vast ice sheets that had covered much of North America and Northern Europe began to melt, releasing unimaginable quantities of water into the oceans. Over the course of several thousand years, global sea levels rose by more than 100 meters. Coastlines shifted inland, River systems changed course, and enormous areas of land that had once supported human communities disappeared beneath the sea. To appreciate the scale of that transformation, it is worth remembering that many prehistoric people lived along coastlines, estuaries, and fertile river valleys. These areas offered fresh water, an abundance of food, and a relatively mild climate. If settlements exist in these regions, many would now lie underwater, hidden beneath layers of sediment and inaccessible to archaeologists. Entire landscapes where generations once lived, hunted, and built their communities may have been swallowed by the rising sea. For the people who witnessed these changes, the world itself must have seemed to be coming apart. Shorelines would have retreated year after year. Familiar landmarks would have vanished. Villages may have been abandoned as the sea advanced inland. Productive land was lost, and communities were forced to move, adapt, or perish. Even gradual change, experienced over generations, would have left a profound mark on collective memory. Some scientists have also proposed that this period may have included more sudden and catastrophic events. Massive meltwater pulses could have caused rapid rising in sea levels over relatively short periods. Other researchers have suggested that regional floods, earthquakes, or even comet impacts may have compounded the upheaval. Whether gradual or abrupt, the effect on human societies would have been profound. One particularly dramatic example, how our world can change in an instant, is the Zanclean flood. Around 5.3 million years ago, long before human beings existed, the Mediterranean basin was partially dried out during what geologists call the Messinian salinity crisis. When the natural barrier at the Straits of Gibraltar failed, water from the Atlantic is believed to have poured back into the basin at an almost unimaginable rate, refilling the Mediterranean in what may have been one of the largest floods in Earth's history. Of course, no human being was present to witness the Zanclean flood, and it cannot be the source of the later myths. But it serves as a powerful reminder that our planet is capable of hydrological events on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. Entire seas can vanish and return, landscapes can be transformed beyond recognition. What seems permanent on a human timescale is, in a geological term, surprisingly fragile. Closer to human history, one detail becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Almost every major religion and ancient civilization preserves a story of a great flood, or a cataclysmic event that brought the world to an end. In these stories, humanity is nearly wiped out, and only small numbers of survivors remain to begin again. Why does this theme appear so constantly across cultures, separated by vast distances and thousands of years? In the book of Genesis, Noah is warned of the coming deluge and instructed to build an ark. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim survives a flood sent to destroy mankind. Greek mythology tells of Daucleus and Pyrrha, who repopulate the earth after Zeus washes away the old world. Similar stories appear in the traditions of India, China, the Americas, and Pacific Islands. Mainstream scholars point out, quite rightly, that floods are among the most common and devastating natural disasters experienced by human society. Rivers overflow, coastlines are inundated, and entire communities can be destroyed. It is entirely possible that these stories arose independently in different parts of the world. But within the framework of this thought experiment, another possibility emerges. What if these stories are not merely symbolic or coincidental? What if they are distant memories of real catastrophes so profound that it marked the end of an earlier age? What if, before recorded history, there existed a civilization far more advanced than currently imagined. Not necessarily one with computers and aircrafts, but a society with sophisticated knowledge of engineering, astronomy, mathematics, and architecture. And what if that civilization was destroyed by a catastrophe, remembered later simply as a flood? A small number of survivors remain. They carry fragments of knowledge into a shattered world. Over time, those fragments become myths, sacred texts, and stories of a lost golden age. If that were true, then the figures we encountered in the next chapter, men said to have lived for centuries, preserving knowledge across generations, take on a very different significance. Perhaps they were not merely symbolic patriarchs. Perhaps, in the language of myth and religion, they were remembered as the last custodians of the world that had been swept away by water, leaving behind only ruined stories and the faintest echoes of what humanity once knew. The early chapters of the book of Genesis describe a world that seems fundamentally different from our own. It is a world that exists before the flood, before the destruction of nearly all life, and before humanity is forced to begin again. In this ancient age, the people who walk the earth are said to live for spans of time that are almost impossible for us to comprehend. Adam, the first man, is said to have lived for 930 years. Seth lived for 912 years. Enos lived for 905. Jared reached 962 years. Methuselah, whose name has become synonymous with extraordinary longevity, is said to have lived for 969 years. And Noah, the man who survived the flood and carried humanity into the new world, is described to have lived for 950 years. To modern readers, these ages appear impossible. From a biological standpoint, there is no evidence that human beings have ever lived anywhere close to these spans. Many scholars, therefore, interpret the numbers as symbolic. Some suggest they reflect sacred numerology. Others argue they may represent dynasties, family lines, or theological statements rather than literal lifespans. That is a sensible explanation, but it raises other questions. If these ages are symbolic, where do you draw the line? At what point does a historical account become a metaphor? And how do we decide which parts of the sacred texts are intended as literal descriptions of events and which are meant to be symbolic truths? This question is not unique to the Bible. Ancient traditions from Sumer, Egypt, India, and China also describe kings, sages, and patriarchs who lived for extraordinarily long periods or ruled for spans that seem impossible by modern standards. The Sumerian kings list, for example, records rulers who reigned for tens of thousands of years before a great flood. Only after that catastrophe do reign lengths begin to resemble something close to human experience. That parallel is difficult to ignore. In multiple traditions, there is a recurring pattern. An ancient world populated by extraordinary figures, a catastrophic flood that brings that age to an end, and a new world in which lifespans and reigns become progressively shorter. Of course, this does not prove these accounts are literal history. It may simply show that ancient cultures use exaggerated numbers to convey significance, authority, and antiquity. But for the experiment, another possibility emerges. What if these numbers are not intended to be precise measurements of biological lifespan, but rather cultural memories of an age that seemed vastly different from the ones that followed? What if they preserve, in symbolic form, the idea that people of the old world possess knowledge, continuity, and capabilities that later generations could only dimly remember? In that interpretation, the long-lived patriarchs become living repositories of memory. A handful of individuals could preserve and transmit knowledge across the centuries, bridging the gap between the earliest days of humanity and the world after the flood. Whether these ages are literal, symbolic, or something in between, they point to the same underlying idea. The ancient world was believed to be fundamentally different, and something profound was lost. If the flood represents the destruction of an early civilization, and if the patriarchs represent the last custodians of its knowledge, then perhaps what survives in scripture and myth is not merely religious symbolism. Perhaps it's the faint and distorted memory of a world that vanished, leaving behind only stories, ruins, and questions. Now imagine our own civilization at its height. Picture cities like New York City, London, Tokyo, and Dubai. Skyscrapers rise into the clouds. Aircraft cross the sky day and night. Satellites orbit silently above the atmosphere. Billions of people communicate instantly across continents. Vast libraries of human knowledge are stored not in stone or parchment, but in fragile servers hidden inside anonymous buildings, and humming data centers scattered across the globe. To us, this world feels permanent. The lights come on at the flick of a switch. Fresh water flows from the taps. Food arrives from every corner of the world. Cargo ships move constantly across the ocean. Aircrafts connect distant nations in a matter of hours. And information travels around the planet in a fraction of a second. Hospitals rely on technologies that would have seemed miraculous only a few generations ago. We can map the human genome, peer into the edge of the observable universe, and place robotic explorers on other planets. It is difficult not to believe that a civilization like ours is too advanced, too interconnected, and too thoroughly documented ever to be truly lost. But imagine that confidence is an illusion. The climate shifts. Ice sheets melt. Sea levels rise. Coastal cities begin to flood with increasing frequency. Storms grow more destructive. Harvests fail. Supply chains fracture. Energy grids become unstable. Governments struggle to maintain order. Economic systems buckle under pressures they were never designed to withstand. The streets of London fall silent. The underground fills with water. The towers of Canary Wharf stand dark and abandoned. In New York, the subway floods. Lower Manhattan is inundated, and the skyscrapers that once symbolized human ambition become empty shells where wind whistles through scattered glass. Across the world, deserts expand. Rivers change course, and once fertile land becomes uninhabitable. Populations move inland. Conflicts erupt over food, water, and territory. The intricate global network upon which modern civilization depends begins to unravel. A generation later, the world is unrecognizable. A century later, many of our great cities are ruins. 1,000 years, forests grow through the streets that once carried millions of people each day. 10,000 years later, much of what is built has disappeared altogether. Steel has corroded, concrete has fractured, glass has been reduced to fragments. Satellites have fallen from orbit. Hard drives and servers, the repositories of our collective memory, have long since decayed into silence. Only the most durable traces remain. A few tunnels, scattered foundations, weathered monuments, and strange alloys buried beneath the layer of sediment. Now imagine a new civilization emerges in the distant future. It digs into the earth and uncovers these fragments. They find eroded remains of monuments such as the Statue of Liberty and Big Ben. They discover half-preserved stories describing a people who flew through the air, spoke across oceans, split the atom, and sent machines beyond the earth itself. What would they make of us? Would they understand how our technologies actually worked? Would they know what a computer was, or how electricity powered our world? Or would they interpret our achievements through the language of myth? Would our scientists become wise men? Would our engineers become legendary builders? Would our astronauts become figures who travelled among the gods? Would the destruction of our world be remembered as a great flood, a divine judgment, or the end of a golden age? This is where the thought experiment becomes most compelling. If this is what could happen to us, then it's not difficult to imagine the same process unfolding in the distant past. A civilization rises and flourishes. It reaches extraordinary heights of knowledge and organisation. A catastrophe destroys it. A small number of survivors preserve fragments of what they know. Over generations, practical instructions become sacred traditions. Historical memory becomes religious narrative. Teachers become patriarchs and cultural heroes. Engineers become gods. Catastrophe becomes floods. History becomes myth. There is no proof that this happened, but it's a compelling possibility. Not because it depends on alien visitors or impossible machines, but because it's rooted in something we know to be true. Civilizations do collapse. Knowledge is lost, and stories endure. And the most unsettling thought may not be that the forgotten civilization once existed. It may be that our own world, for all its apparent permanency and sophistication, is just as fragile as any that came before it. One day, the lights of London may go out forever. The skyline of New York may sink beneath the sea. And thousands of years from now, those who inherit the earth may look upon the fragments we leave behind and ask the same questions we are asking tonight. Who were these people? What did they know? And were they the first, or merely the latest? Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this differently dark episode. So, I can hear you, my dear listeners. Does he really believe that any of what he's been waffling on about for the past 40 minutes is true? And surprisingly, I'm sitting on the fence. If you ask me whether I genuinely believe there was once a forgotten world of skyscrapers, computers, aircrafts and machines more advanced than anything described in history books, or what we've got now, my honest answer would be no. There is simply no direct evidence to support claims like that. And I think it's important to be clear about where the facts end and where speculation begins. At the same time, as conspiracy theories go, I find this one far more believable than stories about alien visitors, secret spacecrafts buried beneath the pyramids, or advanced beings from another world handing humanity knowledge. The reason is quite simple. This theory does not require us to believe in extraterrestrials or supernatural intervention. It does not ask us to abandon science or ignore the works of archaeologists, historians and geologists. Instead, it begins with things that we know to be true. We know that the Earth has undergone enormous changes. We know that civilizations are far more fragile than they appear. We also know that human beings preserve their deepest experiences in stories. That is where the theory becomes interesting to me. But on the other hand, perhaps there was no lost world of impossible machines and technologies beyond our imagination. Perhaps every ancient monument can be explained entirely within the framework accepted by mainstream archaeology. And that may well be the case. But the idea our ancestors experienced catastrophes so immense that the memories of those events echoed through mythology and religion for thousands of years seems entirely plausible. The idea that ancient civilizations may have inherited fragments of old knowledge is not impossible. The idea that monuments such as Göbekli Tepe hint at a far deeper and more complicated human history. And at the very least, it's worth thinking about. Do I believe it happened exactly as described in this episode? No. Do I think it's proven? Absolutely not. But do I think it's a worthwhile thought experiment? Without a doubt. Because it encourages us to ask better questions about our past. How much of human history has been lost? How much lies beneath the sea? How much knowledge disappeared with the collapse of ancient societies, and how much of what we dismiss as myth may contain distorted memories of real events. In the end, that is why this theory resonates with me. Not because I'm convinced that a forgotten civilization once ruled the earth, but because it reminds us of how little we truly know. Recorded history represents only the smallest fraction of human existence. The archaeological record is incomplete, and the stories our ancestors left behind may contain more truth than we sometimes give them credit for. If there is one lesson to take from this episode, it's not that a hidden civilization definitely exists. It is that human history is older, more fragile, and more mysterious than we've often assumed. Anyway, before we go, if this episode stays with you, it would mean a lot if you left a rating or a review wherever you're listening. It really helps more people find the show. And if you know someone that would be great with this kind of history, please share it with them. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, please do so. That's the best way to make sure you never miss a story. Your support is what lets us keep digging into these dark corners. Thank you for your support. If you'd like to help keep the Dark History podcast going, you can join me over on Patreon. Members get early access to new episodes, ad-free listening, full episode show notes, and plenty of behind-the-scenes content as the podcast continues to grow. A little bit of announcement here. If you're looking for something a little more, I'd love to introduce you to the Dark History Archives. The Archive is a collection of research files that I've personally put together using the materials I've gathered over the years of researching dark history. Rather than simply repeat what's in the podcast, each archive expands on a subject with additional history details, contemporary sources, photographs, maps, newspaper reports, timelines, and other fascinating materials that helps bring these stories to life. The very first archive on Jack the Ripper is available completely free on Patreon, so you can see exactly what they're all about. After that, new archives will be available to Patreon supporters. Or, if you'd rather own them individually, you can pick them up from my Etsy shop. You'll find links to both Patreon and Etsy in the show notes below. So, with all that out the way, don't forget, if you're looking for another strange story to dive into, check out Dark's Travelling Emporium. Thank you again for listening. Join us next time for our next episode as we delve into another event and more dark history.